Okay, good evening. Thank you. Thank you for all the organizer who really make this meeting taking place. In fact, my name is Zakariya Odeh. I am coordinator of the Civic for Human Rights Coalition that are working, or our work is really focused on the human rights situation in Jerusalem. We have been really monitoring the Israeli plans, Israeli policies in occupied East Jerusalem, and as well we try to provide some legal intervention. And one of our main work and focus is international legal advocacy. So I am going to speak. I will be speaking about the whole situation in Jerusalem, not just Sheikh Jarrah, because Allah Salami, who will be speaking about Sheikh Jarrah. So I will highlight about the human rights situation in Jerusalem. Because what's going on or what we are facing, we are really facing a colonial settler apartheid regime. And that's why always we say, if we talk about occupation, we undermine what's going on, because it's really more, what's going on is more than occupation. Jerusalem has been always the focus of the Israeli settler colonial policies and regimes since the first day of the occupation. Jerusalem has been really the focus, not only since the Israeli occupation in 1967, but even since 1947, since the Nakba and the establishment of the Israeli state. It's just, I want to go through some historical station where, as you know, maybe in 1947, according to the partition plan, Jerusalem was decided should be under an international umbrella. But as you know, as a result of the war of the Nakba, Jerusalem was divided, and nearly 70 to 80,000 Palestinians were displaced and became refugees, and 38 villages out of 42 villages were destroyed completely. And Jerusalem was divided. During 1967, Israel occupied East Jerusalem, part of the West Bank and Gaza Strip. So all Jerusalem was under the Israeli occupation. Soon after the occupation, Israel took various laws and decisions where it ended by the annexation of East Jerusalem. The first decision was to expand the border of the city of Jerusalem, to annex land from the surrounding villages. And the second one, to expand the mandate of the Israeli Jerusalem municipality on East Jerusalem. And this was as well institutionalized by a Knesset resolution in 1980, where they declared that East and West Jerusalem is the united capital of the state of Israel. So this was really the framework that Israel has established. And since then, all the policies, all the practices that Israel has been really implementing is based on that East Jerusalem is part of the united capital of the state of Israel. It's important to say that during the last 2 years and during even the COVID-19, in spite of the COVID-19, Jerusalem has been witnessing a big increase and an escalation of the Israeli policies, the Israeli practices, which is mainly, land confiscation, building settlements, home demolition, and all these policies. Of course, this policies has been increasing during the last few years as a result of the previous American administration, Trump. We know that Trump has encouraged a lot the Israeli government in its policy, by declaring that Jerusalem is the capital of the state of Israel. and then the American administration, they moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. They stopped the funding to UNRWA, and they stopped as well the funding to the hospitals in occupied East Jerusalem. I mean, during the previous American administration, which encouraged the Israelis more and more to go on with its colonial policy. It's very important, to highlight the main policies. It's important to know that today Israel control and use 87% of the land of occupied East Jerusalem. Mainly for building settlement, there are 15 settlements or colonies in East Jerusalem, which was occupied in 1967. Nearly 220 Jewish settlers, they live in East Jerusalem, and only 13% of the land in East Jerusalem, Palestinians are using or they can use to apply for building houses and things like that. So the shortage of land as a result of the Israeli land confiscation policy, which has been going on since the first day of the Israeli occupation, of course, this affected the housing availability for the Palestinians. So there has been...
Zakariya, sorry to interrupt. Can you open your camera, please? Sorry to interrupt.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
That's good, thank you.
So I am sorry. Yeah. So that have been affecting the housing availability for the Palestinians, in addition to the restriction on obtaining building permits for the Palestinians. I mean, it is very complicated. There are a lot of restriction on obtaining building permit, and because of that, there is a shortage of housing for the Palestinians. Because as well, Palestinians have no choice but to build without a permit. Today there are nearly 222,000 house or unit which has been built without a permit. And according to the Israeli laws, all these homes or houses are under the risk of demolition. As well, during, just to mention that, only in 2020, 170 structures were demolished in East Jerusalem, including 104 residential, displacing 385 Palestinians, including 180 children. That's only on 1 year, which is 2020. And even, as I mentioned before, even in spite of the COVID-19 and the health crisis that we have been going through, all of us as Palestinians and others. So all these policies of land confiscation, building settlements, housing right, denying housing right, denying housing permit, obtaining permit for the Palestinian. It's really part of what it's been called as the demographic control policy that Israel has been implemented. Always the Israeli strategy that there should be a small minority of Palestinian Arabs vis-a-vis a majority of Jewish Israelis in Jerusalem. And so part of this policy is the Israeli discriminatory urban planning policy as well, which has been, the Israeli urban planning policy has always one objective or one goal is to increase the settlements and the settlers occupied in Jerusalem, and how to reduce the number of the Palestinians who are living in the city of Jerusalem. And especially these days, there are various plans that Israeli government, Israeli institution has put, which really aiming to force displace the Palestinian. One of the main plan is what they call it, the city center of East Jerusalem. This is one of the major plans. There is the other plan, what they call it Wadi Silcom or in Wadi al-Joz, which will lead to the destruction of 200 businesses in the city of Jerusalem. And today we are facing another plan or another policy that Israel is starting to what they call it land settlement and land registration. Since 1967, there has been no land entitlement or registration in East Jerusalem. It's just in 2018, the Israeli government, they decide to start land registration and land resettlement. What does that mean? That means it will activate the absentee property law, and where any property that the owners are not residents of Jerusalem, it will be transferred to the ownership of the Israeli government, to the Israeli Keren, they call it the Keren Kayemet and the Jewish National Fund, where all this property will be transferred to their ownership. According to some estimation, nearly 60 to 65% of the property in occupied East Jerusalem, their owners are not residents of the city of Jerusalem. And according to that, they will be considered absent. Even if one member of the family is not residents of the city of Jerusalem, the Israeli government will take control even of one share of the property in East Jerusalem. So we call it, this is really like the second Nakba that Palestinians are going to face in the city of Jerusalem, because as we said, most of the property will be taken over or will be controlled by the Israeli government and the Israeli institution. So, we talk about land confiscation, building settlement. During the year 2020, nearly 5,000 settlement unit has been approved and put for implementation in occupied Jerusalem. So there has been 4 or 5 settlements projects. The strategy of approving and building settlements in occupied Jerusalem is that they are the strategy to surround the city of Jerusalem with settlement and to separate the city of Jerusalem from its extension in the West Bank, from the south, from Bethlehem and Hebron, from the east, to separate it from the Jordan Valley and Jericho, and from the north, from Ramallah and the north of the West Bank. So the strategy, they are surrounding the city of Jerusalem with settlement. They are expanding the settlement inside the city of Jerusalem. So the Palestinian neighborhood will be like, the Swiss cheese, these cheese with the holes. So will be like ghettos surrounded by settlement, by bus roads, light tram, by cable cars, and by the settlements as well. So this is the strategy which it has the aim or the objective to change the Arab-Palestinian character of the city, and part of what we call it Judaization of the city of Jerusalem through land control, home demolition, building settlement. And part of these plans is like the eviction or the forced displacement of Sheikh Jarrah, the forced displacement of Silwan. In Silwan only, there are 5.
If I can ask you to wrap up, Zakariya, sorry.
On Silwan only, there are 5 sub-neighborhoods whom are facing either demolition or eviction. So, it's important when we talk about either Sheikh Jarrah or Silwan to look at the general and big picture of what's going on Jerusalem, to look at the colonial settler apartheid system that is going on in occupied East Jerusalem. So just to finish, that all this going on under really the eye of the international community, and Israel continue with its policy of discrimination, policy of land confiscation, building settlement. because there is no serious action by the international community. There is no serious action by the European state or by, we know the Americans, they are really the main ally of the Israeli states. I mean, always we say that US is the main allies, but during Trump, the US was a partnership to the Israeli governments in all the policies, in all what has been doing in East Jerusalem. Therefore, I think your voice is very important. Your effort is very important to put pressure on the European governments and all the governments in order to stop the continuous and systematic Israeli colonial settler apartheid regime in all Palestine and in Jerusalem in particular.